The South African Reserve Bank has frozen 5 accounts linked to Steinhoff's local operations, said to hold a cumulative value of around 5.5 billion rand. Steinhoff's latest annual financial statement seemed to word this development ambiguously. But what does it mean for the controversial company? Will there ever be any accountability over the Steinhoff scandal, which became known as the biggest fraud in South African corporate history, which wiped out over 12 billion rand from the government employee pension fund? Well, let's talk about this now with our SABC News economics editor, Tshepo Mongoai, and Paulie van Wyk, who is an investigative journalist at the Daily Maverick. Good evening to the both of you. Paulie, I want to kick off with you. Why were these particular accounts frozen? And how do they link to disgraced former CEO Marcus Jooste himself and his alleged girlfriend Bernardine Odendaal via monies which left South Africa and then rematerialized in his account?
Good evening. So the accounts are the local trading accounts linked to Steinhoff. There are 5 different accounts, all held at the FNB Bank. So the Reserve Bank has done an extensive investigation, and it seems as if they've decided that there's a really, really good chance that under the management of Marcus Jooste between around 2009 to 2017, it seems as if Steinhoff has breached several exchange control regulations. And for that reason, the bank accounts holding a total of 5.5 billion rand has been blocked. The reason for the block is that if the Reserve Bank can prove their case, they can forfeit all the money to the state, which means that the shareholders may not get anything. Now, when you mention Bernardine Odendaal, it gets a little bit more complicated because the money that has been moved abroad, that we now suspect has been moved so illegally or in breach of our exchange control regulations, has moved its way around Europe, ping-ponged through different accounts, then came back through a company in Switzerland and Austria into Mayfair, which was the Jooste-linked racehorsing company. And from there, about 60 million was paid in different tranches over several years into different accounts owned by Bernardine Odendaal. That Mayfair account also paid for a number of assets, the Reserve Bank said, and this is all in court documents relating to Bernardine Odendaal, so we know that part for a fact. And that is why her bank accounts were also blocked.
But it seems, and there's an interesting one here before I come to Tshepo and what it means more broadly speaking, is that this detail is one they kind of sought, if you look at the languaging, to bury somewhere in their financial records.
Yes, it seems questionable. So the blocking of Steinhoff, specifically their bank accounts, happened in May. So the Reserve Bank sent FNB a letter in around middle to end May and said the bank needs to block Steinhoff's bank accounts and that they are allowed to inform Steinhoff company about the matter. Now, Steinhoff in that time was finishing off its annual financial statements, audited for unaudited statements for the past 6 months until March. Now, in those financial statements, the CFO's letter was dated June, meaning that they had the decision and that they knew that their bank accounts were blocked. But in their AFS, their annual financial statements, it's not as specifically said. So it's very difficult and almost impossible for any shareholder or any forensic investigator to realize just on the AFS that the bank accounts have been blocked.
Right, and really, really interesting given, the history of Steinhoff, particularly with the issue around the concealing of exactly what was going on in their finances. Tshepo, there is a risk now that these accounts are frozen, that if they transact without letting SAB know, they could actually forfeit all their money. But there's a bigger story here about what seems to be the South African Reserve Bank beginning to get a little bit stricter and a little more activated around managing things like this.
Well, unfortunately, in South Africa, things happen when there's been a major event that has triggered all these investigations. Had it not been that, one wonders if indeed those monies that have left the country, despite that we talk about illicit financial flow all the time, that companies move outside the country and they always find innovative ways to do that. But the real issue here is that we're dealing with a system that, as much as it's one that works in many instances, is not a fair system. There's a lot of exploitation, especially those who are in power are left and to do as they please. The issue here is we really need a shareholder activism that should really dominate the AGMs, and we're not seeing that. I mean, a couple of years ago, we used to have the guy called Theo Abuota, who really asked very difficult questions to shareholders. But currently, many shareholders, for as long as there is a dividend guaranteed, or perhaps there will be a dividend in the not so distant future, they never ask those difficult questions. But there are instances where the money that is at risk here is pensioners' money. Yeah. We're talking about the PIC, and of course the PIC should and ought to be playing a very important role as an activist and using their position in the boards that they sit in, and the AGMs, and the power that they have among the many listed companies. But unfortunately, that is not happening, and it should have been happening. Even the transformation agenda, there was an indication that they will push that, but we're not seeing that. So as a result, people are quiet when they are getting that dividend, but when the dividend rise, they start asking questions. Why are we not? They choose to close their eyes when they see that perhaps things are not done the way they should, for as long as there is money flowing. So it's not a fair system. At times, you look at the disjuncture between the share price and the intrinsic value of the company. You realize they're just sentiments that pushing up what in most of the time we say that this is the market cap of the company, but the forces behind it are not actually the real fundamentals of those particular companies, until even the company, because at times you're hoping that when you see the company results, then that will give you a fair reasons so that you can do your adjustments and see what is happening. But at times, even that is not a true reflection of what's happening in the company. The CEO and the executive are there just to push their term until the end of their term, make sure that things look good, and whoever comes after perhaps can uncover some of the mess that they may have been covering.
What you're pointing to is relates to selfish interest, but Paulie, it also relates to a bigger issue around oversight and managing the financial services sector and the financial sector with the utmost scrutiny. This falls under the marquee of Project Castle. Do you just want to share a little bit about what that project is that's been launched by the SAB?
So when Parliament asked around 2018 how much money has actually left South Africa through Steinhoff and how much we lost, the Reserve Bank initiated an investigation that they at the time termed Project Castle. And there are several work streams or themes under that project, of which the Steinhoff one, and then Mayfair and Berdien Oorendal, and Marcus Jooste himself would be different work streams. So that is Project Castle is the overall term for the investigation. Now, the investigation, when the Reserve Bank is looking into it, it always or mostly goes around or is featured by exchange control regulations and whether there was a breach there. So on the one hand, the Reserve Bank will have to ask itself whether the rules from the Reserve Bank side have been fairly initiated and whether there's regular acceptance of the rules. And then on the company side, whether the money has been moved in breach of the rules and where the fault or the mistakes have actually lied in the end.
And ultimately, this is about accountability. It is about someone being found guilty of doing something wrong. We know Steinhoff stock is listed in Germany. The court there has issued an arrest warrant for Jooste. South African authorities, Tshepo, don't seem to, we haven't seen any developments vis-a-vis an extradition request. So, how far away are we from justice, from a South African context, with regard to this matter, do you think?
Well, we know that the South African authority tend to take their time in their investigations, and often these things can be prolonged for quite some times. But hopefully developments in Germany and the extradition will actually force the hand of the South African authority to actually do something. And I do expect that sooner or later there will be movement in South Africa, both from the Reserve Bank and also the NPA, in determining what should happen with Marcus Jooste and how he should actually be able to leave the country and be able to deal with these issues. But I mean, we must understand we're dealing with someone with a lot of financial muscles to challenge the some of these developments, and indeed it might take a while. And I'm sure there's a reason. I mean, he missed the court appearance, and he's got a very strong legal team in Germany, and I'm sure even here in South Africa. So it could actually be a while before he'd actually leave the country.
Well, everyone wants to see this matter, go to court and get somewhere. But we want to thank you for what you've shared with us so far. Paulie van Wyk, investigative journalist at Daily Maverick and our SABC News economics editor. And if international corruption and the management of corruption and creating accountability is a subject that you're really interested in, we're going to be speaking to House of Lords member Lord Peter Hain towards, I think it's just after 6:30 tonight. And we'll talk about his bid to have an international anti-corruption court established. That's going to be a conversation to look forward to.